Hey everybody, David the AI Guide here. Thanks for tuning in. Please follow us also on Facebook and Instagram. We promise to bring you the latest in AI and its human impact. That's what we care about here. We care about how this technology is affecting and going to affect human beings over the next 10 to 20 years. So on that subject, today we have, oh, by the way, stay to the end for a free resource that will help you learn much more about AI. So today we have news that's some of the biggest news ever about AI. And this is that just released, the European Union has issued draft AI, artificial intelligence regulations. They are the first that I know of. And it's very interesting that it came out of the EU because the EU, you may remember, or maybe you don't know this, started the whole thing about consumer privacy online with GDPR. And then once the European Union passed GDPR and all the big tech companies were exposed to that, then California followed suit and in some ways made it even more strict. So, and now this is everywhere in the software you use. You have all the options to prevent these technology companies from using your information in ways that you don't want if you take the time to set all the settings. And you should, but I'll leave that up to you. Now, these regulations are specifically targeted at two things. One is human impact, which is why we're going to talk about this and why we really care about this. And the other is fairness. So in terms of human impact, it bans using AI to do things that impact people's lives in a negative way. And let me give you some examples for that. The European Union is not going to allow AI to be used to determine whether you get a home loan, for example, or a credit card, or they're not going to allow it to be used to put people deliberately out of work. So this is very, very interesting, and it focuses clearly on many of the themes we talk about here. One of the things I'd be interested to know is, are these regulations going to also ban using AI in job selection, which we've talked about in several episodes. I haven't talked as much about loans, but I can tell you here in the United States, AI is being used heavily to determine whether you get a credit card or a loan, and a mortgage and stuff like that now. That is not optimal. And the reason why, as we know, is that AI is programmed by humans, and there's problems with that. We're going to talk about the main problem with that in just a minute, so hang on for that one. But one of the areas that AI is now used heavily for in the United States, which I didn't really appreciate until I was reading this about these new AI regulations, is AI is being used heavily in deciding custody of children and in divorces and sentencing for criminal defendants, specifically banned by EU draft regulations. Now, assuming these regulations go through, this is really going to protect EU citizens from some of the worst potential abuses of AI. Now we're going to go to the second element, which is fairness. And we also know, because we've talked about this a lot, and there's a lot about it in the press constantly, that AI algorithms are biased. So, for example, many of the companies that started to use them as recruiting tools to sift through resumes and stuff like that stopped because the algorithms were biased and were excluding minorities and women. So, this is the kind of thing that would be clearly banned in the EU, because another main focus of these draft regulations is bias in AI algorithms. And so this is going to require people who want to develop, sell, and allow use of AI systems in the EU. They're going to have to up their game to do a much better job of eliminating bias in their algorithms. So what do I think about all this? And my thoughts specifically focus on our mission here at the AI Guide to talk about the human impact of this technology, and not officially a mission, but also a mission is to protect people from the worst aspects of AI. I think that once these regulations become final, just like with consumer privacy, other countries will gradually start to adopt these. And I think adoption will accelerate dramatically between 2025 and 2030. Why do I think that? Well, if you start thinking about here in the US, 40 million being put out of work by AI and its uses, or globally, hundreds of millions of people being put out of work by AI, heavy pressure will come to bear on governments over this issue. Very heavy pressure. So, the United States in recent years hasn't been very pro-regulation, but I think that once the massive job displacement starts to hit, even this country will begin to adopt it. Now, states, of course, are free to adopt regulations ahead of the federal government or in addition to the federal government here. And we can look for California probably, but possibly other states to lead the way on regulations that run in parallel and a few years behind what's being done in the EU, just like privacy did. I think California passed their privacy law in 2018 or 2019, so it was a couple of years after the EU did it. But these regulations, the issue of regulation is important because we know that AI can be used for very, very good purposes. And I am a strong proponent of that. Things like correctly diagnosing disease better than humans, like reading x-rays and stuff like that, even though that will put radiologists out of work. We want people to be healthy. That there is a high moral, ethical, and societal value to be placed on good health that probably outweighs the job losses from using AI technology to read CAT scans, MRIs, and X-rays. But again, that's a societal determination that'll be made over the coming years. But there's other things that are real different. And I think that some of the things that the draft regulations for the EU specifically ban, like using AI to decide whether you get a mortgage loan or not, or using AI to decide how you get sentenced and stuff like that, is highly appropriate. These are areas where humans continue to need to be involved, and human judgment needs to be brought to bear. Now, that isn't to say that humans aren't also biased, and that is a problem that has been slowly being addressed and will need to be continued to be addressed. But We don't want to turn certain aspects of our lives over to algorithms. Another area where we're going to have to think about this seriously is with public utilities, because if AI ends up being totally in charge of the electric grid, the water grid, and stuff like that, I'm not 100% sure that is a great decision. And I can tell you that when I went to the Applied Artificial Intelligence Conference in San Francisco in 2019 BC, before COVID, the people at the forefront of AI globally, like the head of AI at Facebook and so forth, were saying, you don't want to put public AI in charge of critical human needs like food distribution and electricity distribution and water distribution and stuff like that. So we'll see how this all develops, but at least it's a start with regulations to protect human beings, which needs to happen. It needs to happen. The scope of it can be debated and should be debated, but it needs to happen. Thanks a lot. Take care. Click the link below for the free AI resource that'll help you learn much, much more about AI in a focused and easy way. The resource is free. What you're going to be shown is free to use and learn. So go for it. There's no downside. Take care. See you next time.